Okay, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Dan Smith, President and CEO of the Vermont Community Foundation. Welcome to the third live event of the Vermont Community Foundation's Insight Hub, an information series intended to provide folks with insight that can inform their giving. This is powered by Vermont Community Foundation's engagement and research and informed by the lived experience of Vermonters from all over the state. The Insight Hub offers webinars, events, briefs, and peer-to-peer experiences that help philanthropists and funders understand where their giving can make the greatest difference in Vermont. Our goal today is to foster a discussion, first among the panel, and then with audience involvement. Our hope is to create a space for generating ideas to inform the work of donors and fund holders. Key to the work of the Community Foundation is closing the opportunity gap. That work depends on a commitment to foster a sense of belonging and equity among all Vermonters. I'm thrilled to welcome Fran Stoddard as our panel facilitator today. In a moment, I'll turn it over to Sarah Waring, the Community Foundation's Vice President for Grants and Community Investments, to provide an overview of our work in this space, specifically referencing our Welcoming, Equitable, and Anti-Racist Communities Recovery Initiative in the COVID-19 response effort, and some of our early learnings from investments in creating and fostering belonging in Vermont for everyone. A few quick housekeeping notes. We are recording this and it will be posted on the Community Foundation website. We are hoping to have one long extended audience Q&A towards the end of the session, but we encourage everyone to submit their questions at any point using the Q&A feature that you see at the bottom of the Zoom window. Again, we'll post the recording at vermontcf.org. And if you think of questions after the webinar concludes, feel free to send them to info@vermontcf.org. As I hand it to Sarah, I encourage you to think ahead and reflect ahead into what your questions might be as philanthropists, funders, and stakeholders in this space. Thank you very much, Sarah, and I look forward to a great discussion.
Thanks, Dan. And it's an honor to be here today with everybody. My job is to talk a little bit today about what the Community Foundation has learned by investing time and resources in creating belonging in Vermont, and specifically for BIPOC Vermonters. My name is Sarah Waring. My role is Vice President for Grants and Community Investments. And I'll talk about our process and then our strategies, and then a little bit about our lessons learned. When we began the work of the initiative that Dan referenced last year, we started by working and speaking with advisors of color and Indigenous Vermonters, elected officials, professionals, and nonprofit leaders. Some of these folks have been making their work in Vermont about equity and racial justice for years. But from our advisors, we also learned that white Vermonters are often asking BIPOC Vermonters to teach them about equity, even when they've not made it their life's work, when it's their experience and not their profession, and that this can be exhausting and traumatic. We learned that it's simple for white folks in Vermont to say BIPOC community, but that this doesn't necessarily exist, or at least it doesn't exist in any one singular form. And we learned that language is so important to communicate intent. When we started this, we used the term welcoming, but over time it became clear that this centers whiteness and white Vermonters as welcoming others. And we know that white Vermonters were not the first ones here on this land. So rather, we are beginning to understand that it is about belonging for all Vermonters. So we used three strategies primarily in our grant making last year. The initiative was upwards of $750,000, and it did three primary things. First, we supported organizations led by Black and Indigenous and people of color in Vermont, particularly those who are working to build community. These are places and organizations that are claiming space for identities in Vermont, building awareness and raising affinity groups. We have made multi-year grants to organizations like Abnaki Helping Abnaki, Allied Vermont, JAG Productions, Atui, Living Proof Mentoring, Gadakana, the Professionals of Color Network, the Clemens Family Farm, and more. These organizations and so many others, including many that we've missed, are doing work to build safe spaces for youth or adults where they can have basic needs met, build strong partnerships, advance social change, and have what they need here in Vermont. We also supported towns and municipalities who needed outside help, like consultants, to help with difficult conversations about racial identity. We all know that across Vermont right now, people are having hard conversations. And in many cases, it's a community group or a church or a parent-teacher group that is having to be bold and hold the space to come together across difference, whether that's political or economic or racial. And finally, and perhaps most particular to Vermont, we were told by our advisors that there are two places of localized power and privilege in our communities. These are our public schools and our municipal leadership. So we've been supporting the associations that can support school leaders and local leaders, school boards, select boards, and more, so that they can begin to learn the tools that they need to make Vermont communities a place where all belong. We're proud of the difficult learning that the Vermont League of Cities and Towns, the Vermont School Board, Superintendents, and Principals Associations are all doing to learn about equity and white supremacy culture and to build tools for their members. Now, for us, it's been an incredible journey and a couple of things we've learned along the way. Belonging is truly about a change in culture, and each community in Vermont needs to take its time to think about how to change culture. What's happening in Winooski is not what's happening in White River Junction or Randolph or Newport. While systemic racism is hundreds of years in the making, and we may not have the chance to see it all unraveled or amends made, we do have a chance to build equitable communities here in Vermont. But this means communities need the time to come up with their own solutions. We've also realized that the kind of grant making we've done, and that many of us do, is transactional. We have learned and are still learning how to go deeper into relationship, how to be flexible in grant making, how to use community engagement as a part of our work, and how to step aside so that voices other than ours can be heard. As a funder, we need to be real about what we can and can't do and take responsibility for our own education. The Opportunity Gap framework really has helped us to start this work, and we're thrilled to be here today because it's helping us to keep learning and working towards Vermont's future. So finally, when we think about Vermont's future, we try to imagine a Vermont where no matter what your skin color, your ethnicity, your proximity to wealth, or your zip code, you have access to a great education. You can start your own business and get investments. You could buy your own house and feel safe in your neighborhood and your state. And you could retire easily, passing on wealth and history and heritage proudly to your children without fear for them. For us, the long-term community and economic development, health outcomes, as well as our ability to respond to crises like COVID-19 or climate change, will rely on our ability as humans to have the same opportunities to do so. And that's why I'm so excited to be here today with this group of panelists. And I will turn it from there to Fran.
Thank you so much, Sarah. So now I'd like to introduce each of these excellent panelists. We'll take a few minutes to respond to the question, what is the most effective way philanthropy can create belonging in Vermont communities? And then we'll follow up that with an open discussion with our panelists and then open it to your questions. And we're going to start with Mia Schultz today. She is the Catalyst Leadership Coordinator for Rights and Democracy Institute. And she is also the president of the Rutland area NAACP. Maya has been in Vermont for 7 years. She became involved in advocacy and activism due to events that happened in her childhood, happened to her children. I'm sorry, Mia. And since then, she has worked towards transformative inclusion and equity initiatives that affect all institutional systems in the state and beyond. Mia, thank you for being with us, and go ahead with your opening statement.
Thank you so much, Fran, and thank you, Vermont Community Foundation, everyone involved with this panel for allowing us to speak today. And so before I answer that question about what philanthropy can do for belonging, I would start to talk about what it would look like for anyone to feel like they belonged in Vermont's communities. And to me, that starts with our basic needs being met. Things like housing, stability, access to healthcare, economic stability. It also includes a sense of safety and security and the ability to just move through life without being harassed, with the sense of that there's safety in your community, and that community leaders and public servants honor and respect the communities that they serve. So with that grounding definition in mind, it helps to answer where that question, where philanthropy fits in. And I love that framing that you've given us. It seems like a great opportunity to make the case for investment in change-making organizing and leadership education and overall investment in people for a long-term solution. As we know, only a tiny sliver of philanthropy dollars go towards things like community organizing and developing a new generation of change makers. But the majority goes into more direct service programs, which we know and wholeheartedly agree that this is especially needed with all the crises that our communities face, and that we have to provide that relief and support to our communities. But to change the status quo and disrupt the unjust systems that got us into this mess in the first place, there has to be an investment in making change over a long-term process of organizing and developing a new generation of change-making leaders. So that's why it's really exciting for me to see the movement in this direction, investments in programs like the Catalyst Leadership Program that I am fortunate to lead. And that we in that program is where we acknowledge the whole person. The people in this program, they identify as BIPOC, and they identify as people with disabilities, LGBTQIA, and women. And many of them are the combination of two or more of those positionalities. And we address the implications of long-term inequities and the fact that most people do not even see themselves as leaders who have valuable ideas or voices in their communities. We address the whole person so that we can change the narrative and influence all of our sense of belongings, that we all exist and matter in our communities, and that the most basic needs can only be met with all of us properly at the table, being listened to and valued at that table. So this is a long-term plan that I think philanthropy can get behind. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mia. Now we'll move on to Rich Holshoe. He lives along the Connecticut, or as he taught me, the Quinnetuk River in Wantastagook, also known to many of us as Brattleboro. Rich is a spokesperson for the Elnu Abenaki tribe. He directs the Atui Project, committed to Indigenous cultural affirmation and outreach. So Rich, go ahead with your opening statement and your thoughts about the most effective way that philanthropy can create belonging in Vermont communities.
So Wuliwani, thank you, Fran, and thank you, Dan and Sarah, Vermont Community Foundation, and to my fellow panelists for being here to speak to everybody that's out there in virtual world, and virtual with a V and Vermont with a V. We're all looking at this community, this broader community. I'd like to introduce myself in the language of this land, the language that comes from this land, and which sees this land through Indigenous eyes. So I will say to you, Kwai Nidombak, and Delawizi Litz and Wantastagook, Utisokwakik, Pakwinonguzian. My name is Rich, and I'm from down the river in what we call Brattleboro today, traditionally known as Sakoki country. It's good to see you today. The Abenaki language can help inform this question that we have in front of us. How can philanthropy assist belonging here in Vermont communities? It is a language of relationship, communities, coming together, getting to know each other. The English language is composed primarily of nouns. It is about objectification. It's about things. The Abenaki language is a language of verbs and those relationships that I mentioned. So when we talk about, when we ask this question, I tend to circle around questions. I look for what they're trying to say. I look for the meanings. I look at the words inside of them because language is important and words matter. I look at the word belonging. What does that mean? That is another way to say relationship. How do we feel like we belong here? And how do we feel like this place accepts us as belonging here? What is a community? Inside the word philanthropy, we have love for mankind, for humankind. It is an anthropocentric concept. I look at community and the native values, value community as all of our relations, everyone who is here, all the things, all the ones that are here in what is now Vermont. This is the community at large. We need to expand our sight. We need to expand the way that we think about things. Love of that larger community, including human beings, because we're human. We identify with our own kind first. They're in front of us. Humans are complicated. We tend to move among our own kind. We don't look beyond ourselves, but I would encourage you to look around. Look around. As I'm circling this question, I'm asking you to look around too. Who's in your community? Who have you not seen? Some of the people that are represented on the panel here today come from those communities that you may not be familiar with. But together, we can create this resilient, diversified community that can persist. We don't put all our eggs in one basket. I want to refer to the earlier reference to basic needs, physiological needs, safety, things like that. Those are important, and you might recognize those at being at the bottom of what they call Maslow's hierarchy of needs, that famous pyramid. I want to point out to you that when Abraham Maslow formulated his hierarchy of needs, he had immediately been in residency at a Blackfoot reserve with the Siksika people. Many of his principles came from the time he spent with them. But when he formulated his pyramid of needs, he left their names out. There's part of the problem. People that are not heard from, people that are not seen. These values persist. They're values because they've lasted. Tradition. It's not about being stuck in time. Native people are not stuck in the past. They are here now. They have always been here, and they will always be here. But in that persistence of values, we move forward and we change. The word change is going to come up a lot today. We embrace change. It happens. Change is constant creation. We are a part of that constant creation. So if we include the voices that we have not been hearing from, if we give them the ability to speak for themselves, the resources that they've lacked in the past, we all can come together and create that stronger community. I want to encourage you to do that. The Native people of this state, they're still here. They've always been here, but they've only just come out of the shadows. The state of Vermont only recognized its Indigenous people 10 years ago. And they've been here 12 to 13,000 years. That speaks to sustainability. That speaks to good values. Let's talk, let's share, let's learn from each other. Thank you.
Thank you, Rich. I'd now like to move on to Weiwei Wang. Weiwei was born in Beijing, China, and grew up in South Burlington, Vermont. After working in logistics and event management and academia, she co-founded the Vermont Professionals of Color Network and has recently stepped into the role of Director of Operations and Development for the organization, where she has the opportunity to help professionals of color across the state to access the resources that will help them advance in the workplace, as well as to find broader community. Weiwei, please go ahead. Thank you.
Thanks, Fran. Thanks, Mia, and thanks, Rich. So the Vermont Professionals of Color Network, we're here to empower and advance networking and career development opportunities for people of color throughout the state of Vermont. We do this by increasing access to resources around the state, whether that's at an individual still in school or someone in the retirement years. From our point of view, the most effective way philanthropy can create belonging is through increasing access. and not just in terms of physical access to a resource, but also the availability of a resource, the affordability of a resource, whether that's in cost or in time, the accommodation of a resource to the community that it serves, or the acceptability of the resource within the community itself. People of color are historically under-resourced. We don't come from generational wealth, and that doesn't mean just financial wealth, that also means knowledge wealth. So for us, access can be showing up in simple ways, or it can show up in more complex ways. So access can be to safety, as Mia said. Access can be to basic needs and listening to the folks who are in the greatest need, as Rich was just talking about. Access can also be to more career opportunities and access to consistent funding to organizations like the Catalyst Leadership Program, where people can have access to leadership opportunities, or ATOE, or the Vermont Professionals of Color Network. So I think for us, like Sarah was saying in the introductions, our organization, the Vermont Professionals of Color Network, as well as all the folks represented here on this panel, we know our community, we know the issues in our community because we are connected to the community. And I think what each of our organizations do is to serve people of color first and foremost through increasing access in some way, shape, or form. Thank you.
Thank you, Wei Wei, so concise. We now turn to Don Turner. Don Turner Jr. is the town manager of Milton, as well as a real estate broker and developer and owner of rental properties. From 2006 to 2018, he was a member of the Vermont House of Representatives, serving as House Minority Leader from 2011 to 2018. And Don has been a member of the Milton Fire Department since 1983. He resides in Milton with his wife, Gail, and his three daughters, Emily, Hillary, and Erin. Thank you, Don, for being with us, and go ahead.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Fran, Dan, Sarah, and the Vermont Community Foundation for inviting me to participate in the panel today. Having served at both the local and state government, I believe that government must play an important role in ensuring that everyone belongs. A local government can chart the course for community by adopting resolutions, declarations, conducting educational sessions for staff, board, and commission members, and elected officials, but faces challenges when we attempt to actually change the culture of the community. Elected or appointed officials generally focus their energy and efforts on the municipal operations, not tackling these difficult conversations about race, equity, and equality. I think philanthropy plays a critical role in ensuring that all Vermonters feel like they belong. In our community, we have done the declarations, we are doing the resolutions, we are changing policies, and we are working toward long-term change. But philanthropy, I believe, is essential in organizing community events that focus on long-term cultural change. Everyone needs to feel like they belong, and the only way that can be done is long-term, steady commitment to these issues. I also believe that philanthropy is essential to support the local community-based organizations in their efforts to bring people together. These organizations have are positioned better to conduct educational events in a non-adversarial manner, as well as social gatherings, so that we can move Vermont forward. So thank you, and I'm glad to be part of this panel today.
Thank you, Don. And hopefully you guys can hear me with some airplanes overhead. What I'd like to do now is have the four panelists actually talk amongst each other a bit. You've all had this introductory statement. There are ideas about how philanthropy can fit into moving us forward. Is there something that one of you has said that sparked something for another one of you? Is there something more you'd like to add or comment on? And meanwhile, I'd like to encourage our listeners to enter questions for our panelists using the Q&A tab at the bottom of your screen, and we'll get to those in a few minutes. So if everybody is here for a second, you can unmute and we'll see you. if somebody has some thoughts of what might be added to this conversation and these opening thoughts about philanthropy and where that might fit in.
I'll be happy to
And-
start.
Okay,
I-
terrific, Maya, thank you.
I felt the pressure. Well, I just wanted to make a comment to Don's statement in that, it is important that municipalities begin having these difficult conversations, and really centering and listening to those conversations is an important key in that piece, because I do find that a lot of cities and municipalities and schools are adopting declarations of inclusion, but there is no follow through in that. And that now that they have this statement that says, we accept everything, it's nothing but words. The actions behind it are not fully thought through. And I can think that philanthropy can help in that, in encouraging a follow through piece to those cities who are adopting these declarations of inclusion and such. That's just my input on that.
That's,
Thank you.
that's great. And even if people have some stories about what has worked, what are some of those actions, those real actions? So, well, anybody else want to follow up with what we heard at the beginning? And
Rich has
or, oh, Rich, go ahead, Rich.
Oh, sure. Thank you.
I need to view you all
I think
differently.
something that's important to acknowledge here is the gap in understanding and awareness. A lot of people just don't know, and you can only act on what you know. You can't act on what you don't know. And so there is a need for people to learn, to come together. I think Vermont Community Foundation is working to convene that coming together and that sharing of experiences that others may not be familiar with. I want to commend that. I want to encourage that. If there are ways to fund that addressing that active awareness gap, it's really important. You can't just take a pile of funds or resources and pass them over to somebody if you don't know that they exist or who they are or what their priorities are. They need to speak for themselves. The
Yes.
communities need their own voices. And we need to find a place for that to happen. Vermont Community Fund is working on that, Community Foundation, and other groups are as well. It's important to acknowledge that you don't know what you don't know, and then actively go after it.
Even if it's uncomfortable, I
Yes.
feel like. Sorry, I just wanted, a lot of times people are like, I'm ready to have these conversations. And then when you have them, it becomes unbearable for them and they're ready to shut it down. So I just feel like sitting and knowing that you're going to be uncomfortable with what you hear is important. Sorry, Wei Wei, go ahead.
It is
I
important.
completely,
Go ahead, Wei
I
Wei.
completely agree with everything that Rich and Mia just said. I also think that it's important to acknowledge that a lot of communities of color, we don't necessarily have the access to certain information. And so we also need some understanding from funders when, we need support, like more support when it comes to grant writing. So an example that I'll give is I was working on a community project recently, and there was a survey going out to the community. And one thing that I think people should know is that public documents should be at a 6th grade reading level. This document was at a graduate level reading level. And so that's great for everyone who's working on that panel, who created the survey, who all have PhDs and master's degree. But for the community, it doesn't work. And so I think when folks are putting information out and you're not receiving necessarily anything back, you have to think about what is the access issue to the community that I'm thinking of? Do they even know about this? Have I disseminated it to the right places? Do the barriers exist in the language, or do they exist in the requirements that we are putting out there? I think these are all really important things to think about outside of just your own knowledge of what is actually going on.
Nice thought.
Can I just, yeah, thank you. Mia, everyone, thank you for your comments. I appreciate that. I have so one of the things that I've been working on this, it's a hard issue for me, for many of us, for all of us, as you've said. Difficult to talk about the challenges, but I've attended a number of training. We have done a lot of things in Milton, some with just the town, some in partnership with the school. And there's been different presentations and different ways to talk to people, but I've found that every time that it becomes, an adversarial discussion, that a lot of people just shut down. How do we continue this hard conversation without feeling like people are attacked? How do we do that? And that's some of the stuff I've worked with, been working with Jude Rochelle from Abundant Sun for the last 8 months, 9 months, and it's been very helpful. But I still find it very hard when people come to me and say, well, I don't feel like I'm included. I don't know how to do that. Give me some, can you guys help me with that? I don't know how to talk about this and not feel like sometimes people are being attacked. Is there a way to do that?
Well, first I would ask which people are being attacked, which people feel like they're being attacked.
Well, when people come in, so we've had a number of different presenters, and one presenter we had like 4 years ago came in and said, "You're all a bunch of racists." It just started out like that. And what happened in the room was people the blinders went up and nobody, everybody felt offended. There was no communication. It just was very uncomfortable and very negative. The approach that I found with Jude in Abundant Sun is that, she talks about all the protected classes and how we get there and how some people feel that they're not a protected class. So is there a way to do this better than others from your perspective?
So in my perspective, the person who came out and said, "You're all racist," has deeply embedded trauma. And,
Okay.
and we need to realize that and understand that, and that this is not an attack necessarily on you. This is an attack on their whole humanity, right? And the fact that they have not been seen as a human, and they need to be seen. So you just take it. Like, honestly, you have to just take it.
Well, this was a presenter. This was a class, so we were, so.
Right. I mean, yeah, it's still deeply embedded in some sort of trauma, regardless of the presenter or whether it was a person. It's a reality that person feels. And I know it's hard to just say, like, you're attacking me and my character, right? But at the end of the day, if you're secure in who you are, that's not an attack on your character, that this is how they're expelling what is deeply within them, and that you can move over that and get to another piece. Like, this is how people of color have had to navigate. We have to take it sometimes when we're attacked, verbally attacked, and really so, to get over that, to move the conversation and be like, "I'm so sorry that you feel that way," right? How can I do better? Yep. Like, ask the questions. Just keep asking questions. That's how I feel. I would love to hear Rich and Weiwei's answer to that, though.
Yeah, thank you, Maya. I saw Weiwei had her hand up for a sec. Go ahead, Weiwei.
Okay, so I guess for me, one thing that I always find really important is that when you're creating policies, et cetera, for a community, you need to include that community at the outset. So I'm not sure of your process, but I know, when I look around sometimes, I'll give an example with schools. Schools are making policies for children, but they're not including children in a lot of those policies. So by not doing that, you don't actually know what they want. And so I think it's really important to do that because, and it's hard. It's really hard because a lot of people of color are very burnt out by the work that they have to do on a regular basis at work, et cetera. I think it's really important to first compensate those individuals, and also to make sure that they're in a safe environment where maybe they have other people. And all of that really does take time. But if you're laying a foundation where that is the expectation, you're including all stakeholders in your community in that process, I think there's a better outcome in the long run, because eventually you're going to have to do it. You're going to have to do it. And I think it's incumbent upon all white organizations, like if they're starting any kind of a project, to really do that, or to, have a board, whatever it might be. So I think that's part of the step towards belonging, I guess, is what I'm trying to say.
Okay, thank you.
Mhm.
No, I'm wondering, I'm sorry, Don?
Oh, I was just gonna, I had one other question that I struggle with. It's, local government, having served in the legislature is a different altogether than on a local level. And what I found in the local level is a lot of times the boards, they're nonpartisan. They care about their community. They want to be involved in the day-to-day operations, but they don't, the elected officials don't really want to tackle these hard questions. They don't see how getting in the midst of a big debate or having a adversarial meeting is good for the community. But what I see is that means people don't feel like they're part of it. And I've recently had those experiences. Well, we don't feel like we're part of, we don't feel like we have a say in what's happening in government. And so I have a question for the three. How do we get local government, or is it local government's role? I think it's all of our roles, but the day-to-day operations versus the changing of the culture, how do they intersect, and how do we get there when the people that get elected to select boards are elected by the majority? You know what I mean? You end up with lots of confrontation, and select boards generally nobody runs for them, and we just have a hard time even getting people to serve in the role. How do those things all come into play? How do we deal with those going forward?
Any
Yeah,
comments
people
on
in the
that?
Catalyst
And then
Leadership Program.
Yeah.
Right. Rich, I would think I'll defer to you. I bet you have some wonderful things to say.
Relative to Don's question just now, that is a toughie. I've been on a select board before, and I know that it's thankless work often, and one does not want to expose oneself to more arrows than necessary. Self-preservation, it's a basic instinct. So how do you bridge that gap? At some point, people who are leaders need to lead by example. And I think they need to help people along a little bit, and it's going to have a cost. That is part of being a leader. Traditionally, and I'm not espousing hierarchies, but groups naturally form around, leaders who help them along. If they're doing their job, they are helping the community. They're not helping themselves. Native traditional values, the best leader is the one who gives the most. They are often the poorest person in the village. That is a sign of a good leader. We're talking about philanthropy. There's a lot of connections that can be made here. I sympathize, I empathize. I also recognize that if you are in that position, you need to answer the responsibility that you were asked to carry.
Nice answer, Rich.
Thank you.
Mia, there's a question here for you about if you could speak further about the potential for change through community organizing, and how philanthropy can support that work.
Yeah, I think it goes back to seeing the individuals, right? And investing in individuals, investing in the empowerment of other people to know their community, and to be able to bring the ideas and the ideas and the sense of belonging to their own communities and draw them in, right? So it will start with one person and it will exponentially increase, I would think. So you invest in one or several people who have a passion for this and who want to see change and who can imagine a different reality, right? That's really what we're talking about. Imagining something different. Imagining where we all have places again at the table that are valuable. And so investing in the people as a whole, and then waiting for that to happen, like not placing a sense of urgency to it either. Like that's really important piece because it takes time. This is hundreds and hundreds of years of being told that you are not equal, that you are inferior. And so investing in that person's personal development, in a person and several people's personal development, and then therefore they would foster other relationships within the community to help them to get to that point. So I think that's one idea. I think that there's many, many other ways, but really centering the people and investing in people is important, is an important process of that.
Thank you. I'd like to go on. There's a very interesting question here around identity. We're talking about so many when we use a term like BIPOC as shorthand. I'm wondering if you all could speak about how language and terminology can isolate us, drive us apart, but it can also bring us together. For example, when we talk about who is a Vermonter, can that be helpful or harmful, and what does it mean? And I'm sure all of you might have something to say with this. Weiwei, we haven't heard from you for a minute. So what is this whole idea about who is a Vermonter, and how do we use terminology in a way that helps us move forward?
So can I defer to Rich? I don't want to put you on the spot, Rich, but I think honestly, you might have the best answer to this.
Sure. Thank you, Rich. Go ahead.
Thank you, Weiwei. I think I don't have the best answer. I have an answer. Everyone's answer is equally valuable. I guess I would again, circle around the question and back up a little bit. What is a Vermonter? The state of Vermont is, X number of years old. People have been here for a lot longer than that. Native people precede the construct of Vermont. And so they see themselves as Vermonters in one way, and in another way, no. It's just another change. It's an iteration right now. Back to I'm sorry, I lost my point. The question was?
Well, this whole idea of who is a Vermonter, if we're talking about
Yes.
belonging today, how do we help people belong to Vermont?
Thank you. I'm back on track. So today, my operative question, and probably everyone here, is we're all here now, so what do we do about it? So Native folks have essentially always been here. That's the original people of a place, they and their ancestors. There are a lot of other people here now, and that is the reality. That's where we are in this place, and we have to deal with it. Not all of these people have been acknowledged or allowed at the table within this framework that we're working in. The state of Vermont has been pretty homogeneous and unilateral. And so we need to open that up. Vermonters are everyone who is here right now, and everyone who has ever been here, and everyone who ever will be here. And it is our responsibility right now, together, allowing everyone to speak, these equally weighted voices, to create that future. We are going to create the future. That's the way I look at it. You cannot control it. It's coming. So let's decide how we're going to be with this together.
Thank you, Rich. We have some other questions from our audience, and you can continue to add them in the Q&A. Here's one about how can privileged white leaders best facilitate philanthropy in belonging and investment in equity? So again, we're coming back to this. These are a group of people that want to, these practical answers is something that's not easy, but how can they best facilitate philanthropy in belonging and investment in equity? Anyone have thoughts about how to proceed with that question?
Well, I think the definition of facilitation might be to like advance or help, move a conversation or move this thing, and really use your privilege to endorse and uplift the voices of the people that you see doing the work, right? Like, we have people doing the work. They're very visible sometimes, they're sometimes invisible, and to be very aware of too, in particular, those invisible voices as well. And just to be aware, to look around your surroundings and then endorse them. Because unfortunately, that's the process that we use, right? Is that your voices somehow are some sort of social capital for philanthropists or any other groups or any other communities at this point. Like, I hope at one point that's not the case, but that is the case right now. That is the reality. And you have privilege and power to move the needle per se, and endorse people who are doing this work in the state of Vermont.
Mm-hmm. Yes, Wei.
Yeah, I want to tag on to what Mia's saying. I think one thing that I really appreciated about the Vermont Community Foundation over the last year is that I think it was, I can't even remember how long ago it was, but I think a year and a half ago, Sarah reached out to me to ask, where should funding go? We have this funding, who should it go to? And it's this curiosity of who is out there. Can I get a name, and then can I get some more names? It's that snowball effect, right? So that you're actually going out there learning about, like Mia said, who is out there and all of the work that is being done. There's a lot of work being done by a lot of different people. Coco Casper, who's Bad Indian Wife, she's working on this organization that focuses on the mental health of BIPOC people, the global majority. So that's something that you can put your money directly into. She has a fundraiser on right now to fund her space. So these things are out there. You just have to put some extra effort. Like I was telling Dawn, put that extra effort and go out into the community, talk to people, get one additional name, get 5 additional names. And I think that's really, and then also to give funding out there with no restriction. I think that's the biggest thing, where there's reporting and then there's all these requirements. And I think really these organizations, we're doing the work. We don't have time to do the reporting, to be honest. And I think that's part of what we're trying to look for, is just give us the opportunity, because we are part of the community. We know what we're doing. We see it every single day. We're living it every single day. That's it.
Yeah. Make it easy. So Don, go ahead, a brief one, and I have one last question.
Okay, thank you. I think one of the things both Mia and Weiwei have touched on, but what we're doing in Milton is we've brought the Vermont Council on Rural Development in. They have a history of bringing communities together, focusing on issues that may not be in the day-to-day operations of the town, but making sure everyone's voice is heard, and they're separate from the town government. So they're a steering committee. They reach out to all socioeconomic and classes in the community. They bring them together outside of myself and the select board. So we're using that as a tool, and I think that's a great investment. I think there are other organizations, but that's a good place to invest if you want to truly change culture and understand that there are voices that are not being heard in my office or in the town government.
Great, thank you, Don. There's a question, you've all talked about what it's like to be in a community and feel like you belong to some degree. Safety is also hugely important for a sense of belonging. I'm wondering, how have you learned what it means for all people to feel safe wherever you are? So this whole issue of safety and how to help people feel safe in a conversation in your town so they can truly feel they belong. Mia, I see you're nodding, so why don't we start with you, and we'll see if anyone has something to add.
Sure. Like, safety is complicated, right? Because we all have a different way that we see safety. And I do like that you, Fran, put in safety in our conversations, right? Because a lot of these conversations are not that we're having and that we want to have, don't feel safe to people of color, for people with disabilities, for LGBTQIA, for anybody who has been othered, right? Because they have a fear of retaliation, they have fear of not being heard, and just all sorts of fears. But then there's a real physical safety that people of color in particular have experienced in the state, right? It's made national news, international news in some cases. And so it's really a complicated question. And it starts with the individual, and it starts with our government, and it continues a conversation with our government officials and with our municipalities and so on and so forth. So I don't have a clear-cut question or answer for that, because like it's complicated.
Good one.
And
yeah.
So
any other thoughts about safety, Don? Is there something that your town has actually done around to make sure that people feel safe where you are?
Well, I think we've touched on a lot of things about, communication, and I don't think people can feel safe if they don't feel like they're being heard. And one of the things that we created here was a police advisory committee a couple of years ago, and it's members of the community. We've asked them to reach out into the community. They're studying and reviewing all our policies, police department policies. They're engaging. They're creating programs to reach out into areas of the community where we haven't had communication. So that's one thing I'd like to say. But as Mia said, I don't know. I think it's safe here, but I don't know what people of different color, different backgrounds, different sex or gender preference, I don't know how they feel. And this is what I want to learn as I grow, is how do I make sure they feel safe? How do I make sure they feel heard? How do I make sure they belong? That's my goal. It's my job. I want to learn.
So amazingly, we're out of time, and I want to make sure that all of you have a final statement, a last minute to share any parting thoughts with us, or to answer questions that you wish might have been asked. And just to mix it up a little bit, Weiwei, I think I'll start with you.
Thanks, Fran. I really appreciate being part of this panel. Thank you so much for having me today. I think what I'll just close with is just when considering funding, I hope folks on this call will think about whether it's accessible to BIPOC organizations or individuals, whether a proposal is accessible to these communities, and where the funding is actually increasing access for folks. And I think everything that we've said today can be taken into consideration. This is really wonderful. And please feel free to reach out to me after this if you all have questions, and I'll leave it there.
Thank you, Wei Wei. And Don, your last thoughts.
Thank you, Fran, and thank you, panelists. I appreciate being part of this, and I appreciate meeting you virtually, but I look forward to engaging with you in the future. But I want to thank the Vermont Community Foundation for hosting this event and their work on this very important issue. You know, Vermont is a wonderful place to live, work, and raise their families. However, I believe it can be better. And it's going to be better if we can work together and ensure that everyone that lives here feels like they belong. Thank you.
Thank you, Don. And Mia, your thoughts at the end here.
Well, it's been a great conversation, and I like the format that we went through to get here. And I just want to continue these conversations. I think they're valuable, and with other people, like with the people that are not as much seen, or we would not be taking our own advice, which is to put all of the people in and have all of the input from all of the people. So I want to continue conversations like this, and I want to continue with the multitude of other people who are doing the work and who are less visible, to be quite frank. Like, there's a lot of visibility, myself included, and I would love to uplift those voices when we continue these conversations.
Excellent. Thanks, Mia. And Rich, close it out for us on this panel.
Okay, we'll close out the panel, but the work never ends, and
Indeed.
it never ends. It just keeps coming around again, and we have another try at it. I want to echo everything that's been said by my fellow panelists here. Open up space for the voices you haven't heard. The people who hold the power and the resources are the ones that are able to do that. So be there, be an ally, be a supporter, open up the spaces for these voices. Let the people, let the communities speak for themselves. They know what they need. You can't do it for them because you don't know, they know. And I just want to say, you know, help. Why are we here? Why are we here? We're here to take care of each other. We're human beings. That's why we're here. So, you know, let's do it. Thanks.
Fantastic. Rich, thank you. And thank you all. You've been a terrific panel. I'm going to turn it back to Sarah, who will sum up with a call to action for other philanthropists and funders. So Sarah, can you tell us what this work looks like locally or systematically?
It's hard to say it better than what the panelists did, Fran. All I want to add is that there is work that's happening in your community, inevitably, locally, with a group from Porch Forum, Facebook, your school, your municipality, and there's work that's happening at a statewide level. And checking out the Racial Equity Office, Racial Equity Task Force, and their recommendations is a great way to get started. I want to say thanks to take us out today to all the panelists who are becoming some great friends of mine, to Fran, as always, and to Dan, and then to the team at the Vermont Community Foundation who runs the Insight Hubs. It's an honor to work with all of you on this. For the attendees, please do take a moment to fill out a survey that appears when you log off the webinar. It helps us to plan for future events. Also, watch your inbox for an email that includes a short summary of the key takeaways from today's events. And then lastly, as we've noted all along, this is part of a series, so we hope you'll join us again in the future. The Insight Hub has many more events planned, so keep an eye out and visit vermontcf.org/insighthub to sign up for the emails so you don't miss them. And look, it's 2 o'clock, so thanks everybody and have a great afternoon.